Welcome back, everybody. This is Rodrigo Fonador with another episode of Asheville Real Estate News. Really excited to talk to you guys about a topic that, honestly, we've been trying to have a conversation about this on the show for a while. And we had one topic maybe a year ago. We talked about how not to lose $10,000 on a tiny home. But today, we're just going to talk about tiny houses in general a little bit more. Some of the ways they fit into the overall piece of the puzzle in regards to housing, possibly. And we're also just going to talk about kind of how they're in a little bit of a gray area between being housing or not being housing. And these are all things I think we're going to be talking about because, honestly, again, we wanted to have them on the show because I don't know much about it. So before I bring on our guest today, I want to remind everybody that this episode and all of our episodes here are brought to you by brought to you by American IRA LLC, your local Asheville IRA custodian. So if you have any questions about that, reach out to them. So without further ado, help me welcome Drew Crawford to the show. Welcome.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. As I mentioned in the intro, really excited to get into this topic, but we just met, and everybody else who may not know you yet, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your background and how you got into tiny homes and kind of why we're sitting here today.
I'm one of those people who couldn't quite decide what I wanted to do with my life, so I'm kind of been a serial entrepreneur. So we're here today talking about my outdoor job, which is when my indoor job of being a business consultant left me some spare unstructured time, I built a tiny house. And the only thing harder than building a tiny house is finding a place to put it. And so back in 2015, I began the journey of looking throughout Western North Carolina for a place that would be appropriate for a tiny house campground. And have spent the last 3-4 years building out a tiny house campground here in Asheville.
And how's that going?
Reasonably well. There are 6 tiny houses currently on the property. 5 of them are what I refer to as owner-occupied, meaning the person who built them lives in them. The 6th one is actually the original one that I built. As they say, we learned a few things, and my original goal was to have one that I could travel with pretty easily, even though they're super heavy. And it's so super heavy that this one's now permanently parked, and we use it as the one short-term rental.
Gotcha.
So that people have the ability to come and visit and stay in a tiny house and really experience it.
Gotcha. So just backing up, have you always been doing the business consultant thing, and is that what brought you here to Asheville, or are you a Nashville native?
I grew up in Georgia and vacationed in Asheville in Western North Carolina. Went to school at Davidson College near Charlotte and stayed and worked in that area. Opened up a small retail business and learned multiple point-of-sale systems, started training people on point-of-sale, went back to Carolina, got my MBA, and kind of went into small business consulting, helping small retail businesses do inventory management, accounting, finance, operations. And what that really meant was people needed me to be on call. So I had to set aside time each day, but if they didn't call, I got to work on the tiny house.
And so that was kind of how it developed as, should we say, passion project, side hustle? How do we define it?
It's such a passion project and a hobby that has just gotten out of control. And it's so out of control, I kind of at one point had to recognize that I really did have 2 jobs, my indoor job and my outdoor job.
Fair enough. I was wondering kind of what you meant when you said indoor-outdoor job, but that makes sense. Before you started this project, tell me about how you got into tiny homes. Why did you decide to pursue this, and why have you gone, quote unquote, all in, it feels like?
I guess it really starts as a teenager. I did a little bit of Habitat for Humanity with my father, and so had kind of gotten that bug of what does it mean to build something? And also as a kid, we did a 6-week road trip across the United States in an RV. And
that was good.
Yeah, the traveling aspect is absolutely a key component of this for me. So I found myself at, 30, 32 saying, I really want to start recognizing some of these passions and make them part of my life. And small spaces became part of it. Also living in Davidson, another region outside of Charlotte facing an affordable housing crisis, recognizing that we have been overbuilding homes for so long. What does it really mean to scale it back and have that not truly minimalist, but really community living orientation to how I wanted to live?
And did that, like, have you done work around that before? I guess I'm just curious. Like, I've been inside of tiny homes, and personally, I struggle. I'm like, I don't know. Like, this feels so small. Like, I've always struggled to personally get excited about it. But at the same time, like, it's obviously something special's there because there's too much excitement around it for that not to be. And so how did it go from just something that you're curious about where you're like, okay, I'm going to put time, money, energy, effort into it and start, like, making things happen?
The beautiful part about America really is that we each get to follow our own passions. You don't like small spaces. I love small spaces. And for me, I did a workshop. It was this kind of curiosity. Gotcha. I went off and did a workshop. Frankly, didn't learn squat about how to build a tiny house, but really got me engaged to give myself permission to build my first one. And with its minimum utility, worst case scenario, it's a guest room, it's an office space, but I gave myself that permission to really go through the learning process.
So we talk a lot about real estate here, and I'm curious to know what was the jump or what happened at the conference to give you that permission, because as you know, a lot of times in real estate, that first step is sometimes super hard. And, like, I'm just wondering, what is it, like, what was the mental thing that unlocked for you to go, okay, I can do this, or I'm going to do this?
Yeah, talking real estate. So the piece I skipped in there was was lucky enough to be able to buy a house that needed some fixing up and work through the process of hiring the people to really build out that house. So kind of this incremental process of habitat, then doing my own home renovation. So there was that linear path. To recognizing, what real estate could really provide me in terms of having housemates and doing that work, but then having my living space paid for. To taking the next step of recognizing that there are other people who have the ability to do the build, but they don't have the capacity and the ability to have the piece of real estate all built out for them to put it in.
Right.
That hard to build, harder to find a place to put it.
Right. So you go to this workshop and you say, all right, I'm going to start building one. Or did you find the land first?
My backyard. I mean, that's the obvious choice,
it really was like guest quarter. That was your fallback, and that was very okay. Cool.
I had a Prius at the time. I didn't have a truck. I couldn't move this thing.
So it definitely wasn't going anywhere in a Prius, of course.
There was the time where we put the roof rack on the Prius and went to Lowe's and got some lumber and got some insulation and drove it home. And then I realized this is crazy and opened up my pro account and started getting deliveries. And then, all right, I do want to travel with this. So there was definitely the spark, but then the direction it went from there was kind of unpredictable.
So where has it gone from there?
Well, it has me here in Asheville, having found a place that should work as a campground. That's a much longer conversation, and recognizing there are so many people who are now able to build their own space within the constructs of building a safe space. We now have third-party inspections and ways to make that happen, that we really need more. There are two places in Henderson County, south of here. Shout out to Ankeny Bell and Simple Life down in Flat Rock. Those spaces are, relatively full. We need more spaces. So that's kind of the next turning point for me. And so, just tell us about kind of what you're working on right now and where you feel the next step around the conversation with tiny houses has to go or should be going, especially here in Asheville, because as you mentioned, like, there is a need for housing. So the next step is I've started being very public and making some presentations, and we're now aware that City Council is going to be actively talking about how do we take tiny houses both on and off of foundations, so tiny houses on wheels. Right. How do we write the guardrails to make these safe, legal, appropriate for use here in Asheville? And I think the real opportunity here is San Luis Obispo in California. They basically allow tiny houses to be put in people's backyards as ADUs. And so there are some real opportunities to update our zoning laws and use existing pathways for code and building safety to really make this happen.
So all the tiny houses that I've looked at feel like really expensive. Is that an accurate perception? Are they really cheaper than building a house? Is it a matter of who does the work, how you get it done, or like, I guess like I've gone to when it was Wildflower, I guess, right?
Yeah, Village of Wildflowers was their old name. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, tiny house, like $90,000. I was like, holy cow! Wow. Yeah, not for 200 square feet or whatever. So that feels expensive. But what is the like actual accurate pricing then? Because it seems like you think it's not expensive.
Well, we are taking all of the most expensive parts of a house and condensing them into a smaller space. So let's not beat around the bush. If you start looking at square footage pricing, it's going to be higher, which is part of the reason that builders started building larger, more voluminous spaces so that that benchmark of price per square foot could go down. All right.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's why that is one of the market mechanisms. Is I can build a house that is still $200 per square foot, but it just happens to be bigger.
Yeah.
Any case, the ones you see on TV, these $70, $80, $90, $100,000 tiny houses are not what we're talking about. We are talking about tiny houses that can be built for between $25,000 and $50,000. And what I mean by that is a 20-foot tiny house, so nominally 160 square feet, is going to run about $20,000 or $25,000 in materials, and probably another $15,000 to $20,000 in labor to build. So when I start saying $40,000 for a tiny house, that's what I'm talking about. Is 20 and 20.
Give or take all in, essentially.
Yeah, give or take all in, including your appliances. But we're going to be doing normal apartment appliances, not, stainless steel,
right?
That kind of stuff.
So it's like a lot of things. It really comes down to how you want to finish it out as far as that push, whether pricing is going to make it feasible or not, right? Like, I mean, if you're putting on granite counter, stainless steel, super nice hardwood floors, even if it's small, it's still going to escalate pricing pretty quickly, I'm assuming, right? Or it's just...
I don't know. Please don't put granite countertops in your mobile tiny house.
No?
Yeah, just kind of a little bit overweight. That's one of those things that people did and they realized they can't move it anymore.
Oh, I'm showing my ignorance around this, of course, but
hardwood floors are a great example. I mean, really, if we're talking about the material cost alone for a hardwood floor, we're talking what, minimum $250. You can get some really nice stuff for $5 or $10. Well, in my tiny house, there's going to be 100 square feet of hardwood floors max.
Bucks, give or take, even for
we're talking $200 or $300 to go from very basic to really nice.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, what are you, when you're making these presentations that you said you've been making around town and you're garnering some public interest, some public support, what are you presenting? What are you trying to bring awareness to?
Really, the fact that the obstacle to making this happen is getting 3 different groups of people in the same room at the same time to have conversations that, in a different industry, if there was a lot of money behind this, they'd be able to lean on these groups and get them in the same room. But there's not a lot of money behind this. It's very diffuse groups. It's really building code, which is state-driven.
Okay.
And then zoning.
Okay.
So we've got life safety and then property rights. We got to get those 2 groups to talk to each other. But then we also have to get the political process behind it, which is, you're familiar with NIMBYs, not in my backyard. Well, I like to say that, when you're talking to professionals, it's not in my bucket.
Yeah.
And they're right. It isn't in their bucket. We have to get all those different groups talking to each other. Sustainable housing, affordable housing, building code, zoning, the political portion of the process. And I think that I might not be right on the date on this, but September 6th, I think, is the City Council work session. And they're going to be talking about this.
We'll include the date. We'll look it up and we'll include it. But I know it's early September. I forgot the guy who introduced us or introduced me to you.
Christo,
yes. We have it in our thread talking about it. He mentioned something about it. And that's how I heard. I was like, whoa, this is great. So if we're going to fast forward 3-5 years or whatever the realistic timeline for these 3 groups to talk, what would be happening then that isn't happening now?
I want to question your question.
Okay.
You just said 3 to 6 years. I want to look backwards.
Okay.
3 to 6 years.
All right.
And if you look backwards 3 to 6 years, you'll see tiny houses on a list in the city of Asheville as a way to think about dealing with these issues. If this isn't dealt with in the next 6 months, it's just going to get kicked to the back burner again and probably never really dealt with. And so let's change our time frame. We have an affordable housing crisis today.
Right.
we've got to start finding solutions in the next government time, 3 to 6 months. That is lightning speed when it comes to government.
Yeah.
But I think that if we don't do that and find those creative solutions that are being asked for, we're doing our community a disservice, and we will continue to lose what makes Asheville Asheville.
So on that note, so what does success on this front look like in your opinion? What would be the rules? What would be the regulations that would have changed for you to be like, good, now we can actually use tiny houses as a piece of this puzzle and move forward and start making some movement here?
One of the pieces is the International Residential Code Appendix Q.
Okay.
North Carolina doesn't use IRC, but it borrows heavily from those decisions.
IRC is the
International Residential Code.
Okay.
So we have our own state-driven building code, and they are having conversations about Appendix Q, which is, the short version is it's not really possible right now to build structures, dwelling units, where you can live under 400 square feet. Well, they're about to change those rules to kind of redefine it, where the smallest habitable space could be as small as 7 by 7 by 7. So now we're talking about 49 square feet as potentially being the smallest space that's allowed.
Why is that an arbitrary benchmark, or is there something that actually makes 400 be this number that makes sense as far as the smallest livable space?
All of these rules have good reasons. Really, life safety. I mean, that's at the bottom line why we have a building code. And one of the components that I think drove the larger sizes back in the day was, I call it the coal effect. If you're heating your house with a fireplace and coal, it takes a certain amount of space to make sure that there's proper air changes, and you're not actually like killing yourself inside of your small space. Well, the good news is we don't heat with coal anymore, and our code is just now catching up to that fact.
That makes total sense, yeah. So we're able to get to this point where 49 square feet, that's insane to me.
It's tiny. That is truly, truly tiny.
I feel like 100's truly, truly tiny. So yeah, that's crazy. So we get this building code changed. What's the zoning piece that you would feel like, okay, good, we've got success here then?
Great. So the state is working on the building code change, because that's where that comes from. So what happens on the zoning side is basically acknowledging that there are areas where you can have that allowable density. The good news is that once the building code's changed, putting them on foundations, that's kind of happened naturally. The zoning's already set up for that. There's this other interesting piece, which is tiny houses on wheels and mobile homes, which really have strange interactions with code and zoning, and we really have to start talking about, what does this on wheels component mean?
Right.
Everyone's familiar with mobile home. Well, that hasn't had meaning since the 60s. It's now really manufactured homes and RVs. And the tricky bit in all of this is the construct of, is it permanent? Is it temporary? And so these mobile home manufactured home parks where it's permanent, they truck it in, they put it on blocks, they take off the blocks, and now it's there. They still call it a mobile home, but it's not mobile anymore. And we have large investors, like big investors coming in, buying up mobile home parks and raising the lot rent. People own the home, they don't own the land. And now all of a sudden they're going from paying $300 or $400 a month in lot rent to $600 or $700 a month in lot rent. And they don't have a choice but to pay it because they can't afford to move. So what happens if we leave them on wheels? What if we actually make and recognize that we have a mobile workforce and people want to shift where they're living much more readily than they used to? So I come in, I can still keep it on wheels and anchor it to the ground. That's still possible. That's the piece that zoning has got to deal with. In Buncombe County, they very explicitly tell you, do not anchor it to the ground. In other municipalities, they say, no, we want you to anchor it to the ground. It really comes down to, do we have hurricanes or tornadoes or earthquakes that need to be considered in this area? And what rules does zoning put in place to kind of acknowledge the unique characteristics of this area?
So your vision for this that I'm kind of picking up on this is truly something that could be moved by an individual. Because, we've moved mobile homes before.
Yeah.
And it's a very exhausting process. And it's just involved. It's expensive. Sometimes moving the home is more expensive than the actual value of the home.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things that you've referenced to or about are things we're familiar with because we love mobile homes as part of a really good piece of the housing puzzle, because it is easy to get good quality housing at a much cheaper price in manufactured housing than in stick built. So all of these small houses start becoming moving. So then the last piece, I think, of the puzzle, you said something about politics, but where are people moving them to then? Are we creating this whole new like park infrastructure that doesn't exist? Is that what you're working on?
Yeah, that actually is the long-term vision, is that I can take my tiny house, which is 8.5 feet wide, 13.5 feet tall, and the lengths of these will vary from 16 feet to 28 feet long. That can be towed down the road without any special permits or anything. So I can move from, say, here to Raleigh, which is what, 200 miles? Less.
Sure, yeah.
And you can hire people to tow a big, heavy box down the road for $2 or $3 a mile. So I can move to Raleigh for $400 to $600.
Yeah.
How much would it cost to take a true mobile home from here to Raleigh?
Well, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you how much we paid to take one from like South Buncombe to like Camlo area.
Yeah.
I think $3,800, give or take. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,500 to $4,000.
Well, you've got to get it off the foundation. You got to get the special moving permits. You can't move it with a regular vehicle.
No.
Once you get it there, you got to put it back on these foundation pieces, and there's just a lot more involved.
We moved it, I think it was in March.
Yeah.
Still haven't gotten the final. Can't rent it out yet, so we're still working on that. Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, and it's a process, and it's expensive. So this isn't for everybody, as we've said.
Right.
Like you step into a true tiny house, my 180 square feet or whatever, and you're feeling pretty uncomfortable. I love it. So I can now move between places much cheaper. And one of the things is we talk about taxes. Like, we want to pay our taxes, and we pay them through our license plates. Yeah, there are pathways for things like that.
So what is the taxes piece then?
There's kind of two components depending on who you talk to, and depending on what state you're in.
Gotcha.
North
Carolina.
North Carolina, RV tag. So it has living quarters, and so it gets an RV tag and is assessed on that value. Some other people have taken trailers and just done increased values on them. But we kind of need to make sure that that money has a pathway to get funneled back into the communities where people are living. So that's one of those pieces that isn't yet being talked about, but definitely needs to be addressed.
It's a lot of moving pieces.
Remember this whole conversation about getting all the people in the same room at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah, tough.
So what's next? Where are you? Like, what's the short term, the next 1, 2, 3 steps that you're personally taking, that when you have these conversations with people and people are like, yeah, we want to get involved, we believe in this, how do we show up? What is the answer to that question?
I think this is a political process. This is a community of people saying, hey, we see this as a solution to affordable housing. So this is the time to write your old council folk and say, hey, this is something we want you to put the work in on. Because remember, there isn't a huge financial industry behind this making it happen. This really is the request of the people to make it happen. This September work session the city council is having, there's no public comment, but the public can certainly come and listen to what information is being presented. Are we really examining all the other places that are doing this and really examining all of our options?
When you've been making these presentations, what's your feel for how people feel about this? Is there excitement? Do people feel like it's important to do this? What is the overall energy around it?
This is where I get to say that city staff is amazing.
Okay.
Like, every conversation I've had with individuals is they are intelligent people doing the absolute best that they can. And I totally lost the question in my answer, but what I'm trying to say is that they need the direction to kind of take those next steps. So the elected officials are excited about the possibility of these things happening, and they've got to get the focus on the staff to actually make these things occur. Councilman Young was asking for creative solutions, and I think this is one of the creative solutions we're bringing forward. But getting folks to work on it and clearing the table so they can work on it, that's the hard part.
Who are the type of people who are going to be showing up in supporting this whole process? Like, what's the demographic? Like, who has tiny houses? It's obviously not family people, right? So maybe it is.
Thanks. No, this is a great question.
So who are the people who would rally around this, who would live in them, who would rent them, who would buy them? Where is what's the actual economic here in Asheville factor from your feel around? Is this legitimate, or is this a couple hundred people?
Yeah, let's talk at the humanization of this, because these are real people. And this is actually one of the areas I was wrong about.
Okay.
I thought that by and large it would be individuals, but in fact it's families. So we've got one family who he is taking over his dad's woodworking shop, and she's in school. Another family, she works for the Park Service. Go ahead.
Sorry, when you say families, you mean kids, right?
Well, we're getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting to that. That's just a couple.
Okay,
they're just a couple. The next one, she works for the Park Service. He works in environmental remediation, and they just had a baby last October. And another couple, he's worked in lighting engineering, and she works as a nanny, and they just had a baby, 2 months ago? So these are our actual families having children.
Wow, So, but again, so is this I guess in my mind, it's always felt like tiny homes is it's like a passion thing, right?
Yeah.
It's people who are really going after the minimalistic lifestyle, trying to break it down and live the minimalistic lifestyle. My question is, from an economic standpoint, I guess, is this something that somebody who has a mobile home park says, you know what? Yeah, I feel good enough about this instead of re-renting or buying a new manufactured housing. Do I feel like there's enough consumer interest out there to not replace it with another traditional mobile home and open it up and start renting it to tiny house?
Yeah, there's two pieces that you're going in there.
Yeah.
One is the family's decisions, who are owning them, who might show up at that park.
Yeah.
And so yes, they own the house they're living in or have built.
Right.
And they may choose to sell it later or park it behind the house they buy later when the family grows. That's kind of on the individual side. On the park owner side, there's really the whole, in real estate we talk about horizontal costs and vertical costs. Well, the horizontal costs are kind of in the ground already. Do I want to spend vertical costs and move in another manufactured home, or I can leave it empty and let someone else bring in that cost? So from a park owner standpoint, it's a way to outlay fewer dollars and bring in near the same revenue for the folks who can come in and rent their space.
And are spaces renting the same? What are your spaces renting at, if I may?
Sure. Let's talk affordable housing.
Yeah.
So the way I like to think about it is utilities and electric run about $400 per month. So lot rent. If I wanted to go out and buy a tiny house at $45,000, depending on all sorts of factors, we're talking about a mortgage of around $400 a month.
Okay.
So we're talking about $800 a month. Total outlay for housing for a family.
Yeah.
So we're really talking about in that $14, $15 an hour range to be able to afford that. This fits squarely between the city's benchmarks for 60 to 80% of the average median. Yeah, you're familiar with those numbers and can talk way more about them than I can.
Yeah.
So we're definitely hitting one of the need spots. And here's the difference. This isn't rent. Well, half of it is. Lot rent is still rent. But that other component is ownership.
Right. So, I guess super interesting. So, people are listening to us and they want to get involved and they're like, this is something I want to be part of. How do they get connected with you? How do they follow what's happening? It seems like you're kind of leading the charge around this. So if people get excited and they want to be part of this, then what do they do?
I'm one of many people leading the charge on this in different ways. But you can find me at drew@diytiny.com. So diytiny.com is my website. and I'm happy to collect people's emails and make sure that they know what's going on in this topic in general. But there's also the Asheville Small Housing Advocacy Committee, ASHAC, was more active in actually getting ADUs passed a couple years ago. But there's a tiny house meetup meeting once a month. And find it on Meetup and Facebook, and come to those meetings and really have those conversations about what are the next steps that people can take.
What do you say to somebody who might be in my shoes, curious but skeptical? What am I missing? Or is it just one of those things you kind of either are for it or it's not for you?
I actually need the skeptics to ask questions. That's kind of the stage I'm in, is like, I have this so clearly laid out in my head that I need to know what your concerns are.
Yeah.
So what are you worried about?
So all the ones I've seen, I feel like you have to climb up a ladder to get into the beds. And I guess that for me is a huge mental stumbling block. As far as like, I don't want to climb like basically a work, just a work ladder, right? And then get into a place where I have to like crawl around to like lie down, and that's probably one of the biggest things. I'm just like, I think about it, I'm like, I can't think about it any further. Like, that's just a no.
Okay, so so a loft is a hard no for you.
Yeah, I think
Great.
It'd be really tough to. And I've been looking because I actually have a piece of land.
Yeah,
it's in the county. Would love to set one up.
Yeah,
because like parents come to visit. It's in a position where short-term rentals would be allowed. It'd be great to have family come in, put them there, not share like living space with them, which would be ideal. And then when they're not there, rent it out. But I can't ask my parents to climb up to a loft. And so it's like, every time I look at it, it's like, nope.
Two thoughts.
Yeah.
One, be careful in the county. Yeah. The county has a 180-day rule. We need to talk more about the 180-day rule. We'll come back to that. Yeah. Yeah, that's entirely, that's
so you
the
have
focus.
To move it every 180 days?
No, for the county, Buncombe County, you literally can't be on the property more than 180 days.
Period.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm in the city of Asheville.
Wow.
City of Asheville hasn't written those rules yet. And we want them to start writing those rules about, what happens every 180 days? Do we need to move it 10 feet forward, 10 feet back? We're kind of okay with that because we're using temporary RV connections. They need to be removed, inspected, reconnected. Do we need to move one spot over? Do we need to leave the property for 24 hours? These are the conversations we really want to engage in. But I don't want to forget about the loft. Yeah. You need probably a 24-footer so that you can have everything on one floor. And that's one of those things that's been driving it. We originally were looking at 16s and 20s, and those almost always had a loft. When we start talking 24s and 28s, I'm talking about trailer length now, by the way, just to be clear. We're really seeing bed on the main floor. Also, we haven't talked about the fact you could have a ladder, you could have alternating tread stairways, you could have actually a true traditional stairway, we could have spiral staircases. We can definitely build you a loft where you can still sit up in bed, promise.
Fair enough. So it's possible. Okay. Yeah, I guess. So what is the situation with you having to move him every 180 days right now? Like, that's a huge hurdle to overcome for it to actually be a solution right now for housing, right? Like, you have to be an enthusiast right now, is what I feel, or I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I think that is a fair assessment. You have to be an enthusiast right now. And the good news is there's an awful lot of enthusiasts out there. There's a smaller number of enthusiasts who have overcome the hurdles to actually build their own. And I'm lucky enough to have several of them as my neighbors. And let's just say that it's really cool people who have overcome all of the challenges to build their own home and do these things. So that's one of the things I've enjoyed with the DIY aspect of it.
What's the biggest hurdle somebody's going to have to overcome if they're thinking about or starting this process?
Where to put it. That really is, we're really coming back full circle, which is don't start your house without knowing where you're going to put it.
And pretty much if you're in the county, don't plan on actually putting it there for a long time, right? Or is there a workaround?
Well, the honest answer right now is go to Henderson County. Henderson County's figured it out. Why hasn't Buncombe County figured it out? That's the real question. Citizen Times ran an article in early July about that. And so hopefully that gives a little bit of peer pressure for Buncombe and City of Asheville to figure it out.
That's a commissioner question then, right?
Well, that's why we're prepping presentations for the county as well.
Very cool. Man, I know that there's kind of gone all over the place a little with this because I've just kind of let my curiosity take it. Great. So as we wrap this up, could you consolidate this in a way that make sense as far as where we're at, and then what really is the call to action to make this? Is it just showing up to this meeting in September and then seeing what happens, and or is it reaching out to your commissioners? Do you start building one, find land, go to Henderson County, etc.?
Man, sum it up. The answer is, if you care about affordable housing and recognize that tiny houses can be one of the tools to address affordable housing, start showing up, start writing, start asking questions. And some of those questions we have answers to. We know how to build them safely. We know from examples in other places in the U.S. and internationally what zoning considerations need to be taken into account. And it's really right now just a matter of getting this as a priority.
Yeah. Awesome, Drew. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for asking great questions.
Yeah, no, well, curiosity, right? Let's talk again as things keep developing. It would be really fun to do a follow-up one and keep people updated on what's happening and what they can do to stay plugged in. So for everybody out there, if you're an enthusiast or thinking about being one, connect to the meetup group, connect with Drew. We'll put his email in the show notes. Make sure you guys can reach out, and also the meetup information for the meetup group. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you all next Tuesday. Drew, thank you.
Thank you.